welcome to my yeah, also I'm gonna say first YouTube video. I've been asked to by a lot of people who have approached me basically do a thorough guide on the E5Plus. I got this printer just about a year ago, and I've modded the hell out of it. I think the only thing that's original on my current printer is the bed assembly and the frame. That's about it. But I hope to give you some useful tips on like the things you upgrade first, because there's a lot of things to upgrade on this printer. It's a decent printer, but you're not going to print reliably at fast speeds on it. And the main downside of this printer is that it uses the wheels. The wheels are a huge factor in print quality. They wear. They can be like the tension on the eccentric nut can be like a little bit off. So yeah, they are definitely a flaw. They're a cheaper system than the rails. That's an upgrade I'm going to go into a bit later on. It's not the first upgrade you do though. The first upgrade on this printer is definitely the extruder. You're going to want to get an all metal extruder because the stock one is plasticky. The lever tends to break, and yeah, it's not good. Second thing to do would be definitely to look into another hot end. There's a lot of choices in the hot end range, and I went for the Dragon High Flow from Fetus. They don't sponsor me at all, so I'm just telling you what I'm using. I really like that hot end. It's been very reliable. It's not a drop in though, so you wouldn't need to print some stuff around it to make it fit, like a V6 adapter or so on. But there are drop-ins that are pretty good. One of them is the Fetus Dragonfly, for example, the BMO. I believe that drops directly into the X gantry on the E5Plus, so you could like manage with that. So before going into any heavy modding, you should know your printer inside out. Basically, you should be able to troubleshoot any issues. Like you should know where the fault lies before you start heavy modding. If you want to go into the COREXY, you really got to know your printer. The thing is with these printers is that they are only as good as they are built. So if you assembled your E5Plus, it's your first printer, you've never done any precise stuff, the odds are you're going to have a misalignment somewhere and you're going to have issues that are going to be hard to track. So definitely take care in building your printer's frame. A lot of people recommend doing this on a marble or a granite stone slab that is definitely level. So you're going to have the frame like as a true cube. Trust me, when you go millimeter off, you're going to feel it somewhere in the build, and that's going to cause issues. So yeah, I mean, I bought mine used, and it was a bit hit and miss on how it was assembled, and I had to dig a lot, uh, just tearing my printer apart and rebuilding it basically, so I would have it like behaving correctly. One of the issues I had was artifacts in the print quality, and I thought it was in my Z-axis, and I was chasing. I thought it was a bend in the Z-axis screw for ages. But after doing a little bit of research, I figured out that it was a heat difference. So when I pit tuned the heater bed correctly, I actually got these problems to go away. And I was thoroughly amazed to see like something that temperature fluctuations could have so much impact on the print quality. So definitely do a quality hot end and a quality extruder to begin with, and then before any more modding, decide where you want to go with it. Because If you want to go like for the full COREXY monster conversion, um, do yourself a favor and plan it out a bit. Be like plan out the components you want to use, you want to build and stuff, because it's no fun having printed out like a full HeroGen Me 6 uh, cooling solution with a hot end and all in, and then you end up printing an EVA V6, EVA V3, or a stealth birder or whatever. So just save yourself on the printed parts and just be a little bit methodical. Yeah, methodical with it. Do like a methodical approach on it. Um, what's the biggest upgrade on my machine besides the extruder and the hot end was going Clipper. Uh, Clipper scares a lot of people because a lot of people think Clipper is very complex. It has a steep learning curve, no doubt about that. And if you haven't done uh, digging into firmware before, it can be a little bit daunting, but it's actually quite easy once you understand how Clipper works. Um, then it becomes actually a breeze. I never got the hang of like doing my own firmware with Marlin, so right after I upgraded my hot end, I threw out the Marlin and got a Raspberry Pi and decided to go Clipper right away. It was a bit of a learning curve, but it took maybe a week to get the hang of it. A lot of Googling, sort of like figuring out how the config file works and all that. But in all, that was definitely the best upgrade I ever gave my printer was going Clipper. And definitely go Clipper before you go into the CoreXY mod, because it's going to make it so much easier to like get things to work and troubleshoot the whole thing if you already know Clipper. If you're doing like learning Clipper at the same time and figuring out how to configure a CoreXY machine, it's going to give you a headache. I actually know of a printer that ended up being, well, abused is maybe the, no, it's not the right word. It was murdered. It was murdered by its owner. So yeah, rest in peace. The printer I talk about. It was a bit of a shame. I cry for it in my sleep. But yes, go Clipper first, figure that out, and then you can like think about the mods. Because if you do the hot end mod, the extruder, and the hot end and Clipper, you actually have a pretty decent machine to print the parts you want to use in your CoreXY. Because if you want to do the Mercury 1 mod, which is the mod I'm running, fantastic mod, by the way. Great community. The Discord server is really, really good. A lot of helpful guys there. A lot of guys with really good insight into how all this thing works, and they help you pretty much out without judgment. Like, you don't have to be afraid of being a noob there, and they're pretty decent guys, I can tell you that. So it's one of the reasons why I'm actually sticking with the Mercury 1 mod on my piece, because I like the community around it as well. I also have ideas on my own version of it, which would be 9mm or 10mm belts, maybe IDEX. It's still like fermenting in my head, but uh, definitely it's a good place to start because it's not a very complex mod to do. If you would start by building a Voron, for example, you could be quickly very overwhelmed because the Vorons they're good, but there's a lot of parts, and like I think the assembly manual is about 200 pages or something. It's very detailed, but it's a lot of parts and very daunting. Um, the Mercury 1 mod is quite more easy to build. So now you've upgraded your extruder, you've upgraded your hot end, you've thrown out this bloody garbage here that is the control box. It's really annoying, so I'm just gonna delete that. And now what are the next steps? The next steps are being able to print ABS parts. A lot of people are afraid of ABS, um, and that is because a lot of people think you have to have like very high temperature and yada yada yada. You have to have a very good enclosure and all that. But the thing is, you can print it without an enclosure. I made an enclosure basically with a paper box on mine to get the first parts out. Uh, it wasn't harder than that. Just insulate your box. Uh, you can use a cupboard. There's a large cupboard that like can hold your printer. Yeah, that's enough to print ABS. It is not as toxic as people like say it is. You're not gonna get like uh, cancer from printing a few ABS parts. If you're running a print farm, yes, there are fumes definitely, but just make sure the printer is in a room that like don't have it in your living room. I actually I'm fortunate enough to have a spare room in my house. That's my it's basically the we have the controlling for all the ducts for the heating system of the house, and it had space for a cupboard. So I built a cupboard around mine, and I actually insulated it with rock wool, sheetrock wool, just like a wall insulator. Uh, one sheet of plastic around it, and it's getting like stable temperatures when printing around 50 C, and I'm getting fantastic parts with it. But the trick is to get these first parts decently printed, and you're gonna have to tune your printer, do test prints with the calibration cube, use a benchy, like make sure your parts are accurate, like up to spec. You have to do like the extruder calibration with the steps, or in Clipper what's known as rotation distance. It's not very hard to do it. It's actually quite easy. Lots of guides on it, and when you have that dialed in, you have to make sure that your tension on the eccentric nuts is like correct, and your wheels are not wearing out in different ways, like all around. Nothing should jiggle on the carriage like that. If your X carriage here is jiggling, then you have to tighten your X nuts. That should not be happening. Uh, Regarding the build plate itself, I'm using high temperature magic goo. It's a bit expensive, but it really works. It really works nicely. Um, I have not had much problems with lifting. If your enclosure is relatively tight and you're not getting like breezes in, you should not be getting lifting. After installing Clipper, what you have to do is you have to calibrate your Z offset. The Z offset is how close the nozzle is to the plate. And if your prints are not sticking, that means your Z offset is probably wrong. And you're gonna have to like dial it in, use a first layer test, and just watch it print. Then dial down the Z offset on the fly through Clipper, and then when you have it correct, you can save it. So that's a good way of finding your Z offset. The advantages of going Clipper, there are actually quite a few. More speed, more print quality. You have a thing called input shaper, which is it uses an accelerometer to uh, basically cancel out the resonance in your printer's frame, so it's not gonna go into your print. So you're not gonna have like echo lines, and you're gonna have actually pretty smooth prints when you're printing at relatively high speeds. Um, and it's very fast to change, so you don't always have to compile a new version and like all that. So all in all, I think Clipper is absolutely fantastic. Uh, but if you put the effort into it to just learn it and get to know your printer, you should actually be getting pretty good prints, even without going into the COREXY conversion. So now I'm going to show you my build. I'm going to show you the CAD file because I have it here ready. and I do not have a YouTube set up. So I'm not going to show you into my messy cabinet space. I might do a video on it when I take it out, make things tidy, and just do a live video on it. My print speeds on this particular printer, which is a 2040, 2020 frame, which is not the most rigid. The reason the bigger printers, the fast printers, they're using a 3030 for more stiffness. But I did add stiffness to mine by doing, I used steel. My friend has a CNC plasma cutter. So what we did was to cut out bracing similar to the rat rig. So I cut out bracing to put on all the corners. So I'd like 16 braces to like really stiffen up the chassis, and that came out really nicely. But this is my current setup. This is the 0G COREXY mod. I'm currently running a stealth burner, which is, they're fading out the support for it. They're going for the EVA direction. I like the stealth burner, so I just stuck with it. All I did was I did modify the XY joints for the belt paths to be straighter, so that really did improve things. Other than that, it's pretty much their system. I did go for a different rear towers because the towers they have they do stick a bit out on the back. This does cost you a little bit of the build plate here in the back, so you just have to weigh and measure if you want to figure out these joints or if you want to use their towers. I actually recommend going for their towers before you start like fiddling on. The assembly was relatively straightforward. It's not a very complex build. Um, I think the hardest part was figuring out the belt path, but the belt path itself, it can only really go one way. So just make sure when you are assembling it, after you printed your parts, that like everything aligns up when you're threading your belts. Make sure they sit correctly in the. There's a dowel pin that goes here between. If that pin is like too far down, then the belts, when you tension them, they can basically take this part and push it in, so you have a skewed uh, bearing stack. Happened to me once, relatively easy to fix. I ended up printing like more sturdy towers, and I printed the kit probably 2 times. Once I printed with the unmodified E5Plus, and after tweaking the whole setup with the first version of the Merc, I printed the parts again with more quality, and I have the final parts with that. So mm, my build is only using the motion system. I have not gone into the Hydra bed, which is a 3-point bed system yet. Reason being, it's very expensive for parts to order parts to Iceland. I'm based in Iceland, so it's on my wish list. I really want to do it because I think it looks fantastic. Leveling is absolutely a breeze with it. I've actually been thinking if I could merge using the CoreXY system from the Merc and doing the bed from the Hayward, which is a bit more complex, but it looks cooler. But yeah, definitely more expensive using ball screws. They are definitely more expensive. But I have not had issue with just using the stock bed setup so far. One thing I'm going to mention is if you have the time and effort to do it, remove these guys and lube them up. These tend to be dry as a desert. And if these guys are dry, these are linear bearings. If these guys are dry, your bat is going to have resistance going down and you will have artifacts. It's a big issue with these printers. These sleeve bearings here, they tend to be very dry. There is a way to loop them up. You basically have to remove them from the plate. You hold them in your hand and you basically close off one of the ends with your finger, and you just push in a lot of bearing grease until it forces its way into the bearing, and then you wipe off the excess and reassemble. This really did a big difference in mine. So if you're having bed issues, check these guys. Also, uh, anti backlash nuts. I did put in on mine. That stopped the bed from sagging down again. One thing I did upgrade uh, for this build was to go 60mm high torque NEMA 17s on X and Y, or A and B because it's COREXY, and I did it on the Zs as well. These guys have a lot of torque. I got them off Steppers Online, I believe. They were not very expensive, but they're really, really good motors. They have really high torque, so they're overkill for the Z, definitely, but they do hold the torque that well, so you're not going to have that sagging build plate. Um, the legs are my design, which I kind of stole from Voron. Sorry, guys. I did pretty much use the end cap here from Voron. Don't think they mind, but yeah, I'm gonna give credit to these guys. It's a nice part. You might see the Z is actually mirrored here. I have to fix that. The legs on it are 40mm machine pads. They're like anti-vibration pads. I bought at the machining shop here in Iceland. They really work. They really do allow the body to jiggle without translating it into the frame. So I have my electronics under here, a la Voron and more printers. Uh, some people like throwing it here on the back. It's more easy access. I personally, because I'm printing a lot of high temp stuff, I'm actually going to remove it from underneath and do like a side separate enclosure, which is going to be on the exterior of my printer cabinet. So I want to keep these electronics cool. Raspberry Pi and the main board mostly. So yeah, I don't know if I can say anything more about this. It's a fun mod to do, but plan it a bit ahead and don't don't tell yourself, yeah, I'm just gonna dive into it over the weekend. When you start tearing down and you don't have a spare printer, make sure you have all the right parts printed. Otherwise, you're gonna have to reassemble, reprint, and it's gonna be an absolute pain. Uh, so definitely plan it. Make sure you have the right parts. Ask around on the Discord before going into this mod. Go to the Discord server and make sure you have the latest files. There's a lot of versions of the files floating about, and I actually did that mistake as well because mm, I'm not used to using Discord. I didn't realize how much information there was on the Discord, me being an old guy. Um, I printed out the oldest version of the mod, and I ended up having to reprint everything and wasted a shitload of good filament. So definitely save yourself the hassle, check on the Discord what files to use, and do a little preparation. Have a notebook, jot down stuff. Um, there's loads of config files floating about. The choice of mainboard, I would go for the Octopus or Octopus Pro or Manta with the 8 drivers, because you will need a lot of free drivers for this printer if you're going to do um, the Hydra bed as well. Um, so having 7 drivers is a benefit. I love my Octopus Pro board. It's very robust. It's got um, 3 main fuses, and I've ended up popping a fuse, and it never hurt the board. It was easy to replace and no damage. I know a guy who had the SKR uh, the the latest SKR board, and the fuse was like a non-standard one. It was a bit of a pain, and he ended up frying it anyway. So, uh, board recommendation, definitely Octopus. Uh, for the hot end recommendation, uh, don't pick the what's it called, Micro Swiss all metal. It's barely better than the stock one, and I mean in 2016, yeah, it was a fantastic upgrade. But there are so many good hot ends available out there. You could go with the Dragon, you could go with the Rapido. There's a lot of very good hot ends coming out right now. Way better than even to contemplate microsieves. So do yourself a favor and save your cash. Don't drop it on a microsys because you're not going to use it for a very long time. Just my 2 cents. For the nozzle, if you want to go and experiment, and I'm actually going to order that nozzle myself. It's going to be the CHT from Bondtech, which has got the split in the middle, splits up your filament during melting, and it like remerges it later on, so you get like a better melt zone. I'm actually quite tempted to try that one out because when you start printing at high speeds, you are going to want to have a hot end that can push a lot of filament out. It can melt it, and because if you can't melt the filament fast enough, you're going to have under extrusion. So if you're planning to print at 200, 300, 400, you have to make sure that your hot end can melt the plastic that one needs to come out. So don't skimp on the hot end if you are planning for speed. Absolutely. So I'm gonna call it end the video on these notes. Just it's a brief overview. I might do a few videos to go a little bit better into it. Comments appreciated. If you want me to dive more into details on certain subjects, just drop a comment and yeah, I'll see if I can make it done. Thanks for listening to my rambles.